What's up, you sick mother bluffers? Welcome back to the best poker vlog that nobody's watching. In this one, we're back on the cash game streets at Deuce's. Let's go. In this one, there's a couple of limps before I look down at 10-9 offsuit in the small blind. I decide to make the call, and the big blind checks. We go four ways to a flop of 7-9-8 rainbow. Start things off with a check. Under the gun bet 7, button calls. With top pair and an open ender, I should probably go for a check raise, but in game, I went with a call, and the big blind folds. Three ways to a pretty interesting turn card. It's the 10 of spades, giving me top 2, while putting 4 to a straight and a flush draw on the board. I check, under the gun continues for 20, and the button goes all in for 31. One thing to note is that this raise does not reopen the action, so the under the gun player will not be able to re-raise if I call. I figured this gives me a pretty good price to try and boat up on the river, so I make the call. Under the gun player does not realize that the action is not reopened and tries to go for a raise before being informed that they can only call, so they end up calling. Nice free information for me. The river comes, the 3 of hearts. I check to the undergun player, who fires a pretty small bet of 40. I kick myself for not raising on the flop, and I make a reluctant fold. Under the gun shows jack 8 of spades for a turn straight and straight flush draw, and they're going to take this pot down. In this one, I look down at jack 9 suited under the gun. I open to 10, and the button is the only player to make the call. We go heads up to a flop of king 10-4. I pick up a gut shot straight draw and a backdoor flush draw on a board that favors me as the pre-flop aggressor. I fire a c-bet of 10 and the button pretty quickly calls. They are one of the tighter players at this table, so hopefully I can pick up some equity on the turn, and I do, as the turn comes to 3 of diamonds, giving me a flush draw. I bet 25, and once again, the button makes the call. I'm pretty sure I'm going to need to hit a straight or a flush, or else I'm going to have to give up. And the river comes, the 7 of diamonds, I make the flush. I get the sense that my opponent has a king at the very least, so I'm going to size up to 75. They ask for a count and pretty quickly call. I show my flush, and my opponent shows pocket 4s for a flop set, which they elected to slow play. Unfortunate run out for them. I take down a nice pot. In this one, we're playing a Dramaha bomb pot. 5 of us see a flop of ace 7-9 2 spades. I'm in the big blind with king knight 8 5-2, so not much apart from a gut shot on the board. Action checks around. I draw 3 and hold on to the 9-8 of diamonds. The turn comes the deuce of hearts, and I draw the 6 and 7 of diamonds. Damn, I almost drew a straight flush. And I also draw the 7 of clubs. I improve to a set of 7s on the board and a pair of 7s down. Action checks to me. I probably have the best hand on the board, so I bet 20, and I get called by the cutoff and the button. We go 3 ways to the river, which comes the 8 of spades, putting a possible flush on the board. I slow down and check. Cutoff bets 50, button calls. I fold, and the cutoff is going to take it down with a nut flush and a pair of queens in their hand. In this one, everybody limps before I look down at 6 deuce of diamonds in the big blind. I'll see a flop for free, and it comes 6 deuce ace 2 clubs, giving me 2 pair. Looks like I got myself a big blind special. Let's get value from the club draws and the weak aces. I bet 10, and only the button makes the call. Heads up to the turn, which comes the queen of clubs. Not ideal, as it does complete the club draw. I check, the button bets 10. I make the call, just in case they're value cutting themselves with an ace. The river comes the 8 of spades. I check again. This time they fire for 15 bucks. I decide to look them up. They show me the bad news. They've got the flush with 10-7 of clubs. In this one, there's a couple of limps before I look down at pocket 8s on the button. I raise to 12, and the cutoff, who is always eager to play a pot with me, is the only one to make the call. We go heads up to a flop of jack 6-5 2 hearts. Cutoff checks to me, and against this particular opponent, who I know loves to bluff when they sense weakness, I decide to check back. The turn comes the 10 of clubs, and as anticipated, the cutoff leads for 18 bucks. There's a ton of draws out there, and there's a good chance I still have the best hand, so I make the call. The river comes the 5 of clubs. Really not loving this card as it completes the club draw. Cutoff leads for 35, and I debate this one for a little while. I don't beat much at this point in the hand. My opponent could have paired up on the turn and decided to go for 2 streets of thin value. They might have slow played the flop top pair. They could have bet a 5 on the turn and made trips. Maybe they bet a flush draw, which completed on the river. So I lose to quite a few hands when I only really beat a missed heart draw a 6, or a random bluff, which this player is definitely capable of having. In the end, I went with a reluctant fold. My opponent claimed to be bluffing with King 9, which is very possible. Nice hand to them, and on to the next one. Here we're playing a draw maha bomb pot. 5 of us see a flop of Deuce 9-9 2 spades. I'm in the cutoff with Ace 9 8-7-3 with 3 clubs. I flop trips with an ace kicker, and I've got 3 to a flush and 3 to a straight in my hand. Action checks to me, and I lead for 20. I get called by my opponent from the previous hand who was looking to mix it up with me tonight. Heads up to draw time, I draw 2 and hold on to my flush draw. Turn comes the King of Hearts, putting a second heart on the board. I pick up the Jack of Clubs and the 8 of Diamonds. I almost make the flush, but I'll have to settle for a pair of 8s. I was hoping to boat up on the board by pairing up one of my other cards, but that didn't happen either. Under the gun checks to me, and I hesitate between checking and betting. In the end, I think trips heads up might be good enough to bet and try to push my opponent out of the pot, so I bet 40, but they're not having any of it, and check raised me all in for 132. This really sucks. I did not have to put myself in this situation. My opponent drew 2 cards like me, so my pair of 8s down might be good, but it's unlikely. And unless I pair up on the river, I could be getting free rolled by a spade or heart flush draw. Not to mention my opponent could be holding the case 9, could already have a boat, or free rolling me to 1 on the river. There's a lot of leveling going on in my head because this opponent loves to bluff me. They know I know they love to bluff me. They know I can find some lighter calls against them. I know they know that. In the end, I opt for a reluctant fold. They claim to have trip 4s down and a 9 with a spade flush draw. I'm not sure they would be checking with trips down, but if that's the case, I'm okay with the fold here. A little mad at myself for opening the door to getting myself check raised. Moving on. In this one, we're playing 5-2-2. Top comes Deuce 6-6 2 hearts. Bottom 10-8 ace rainbow. I look down at Ace 10-10 5 deuce with Ace 10 of hearts. So I flop the nut flush draw on top, although the board is paired, and I flop a set of 10s on bottom. Action checks to me. I lead for 20, and the big blind player is the only one to make the call. Heads up to the turn, which comes a 3 on top and a 4 on bottom. Not much changes on top, but I do add a gut shot straight draw on bottom. The big blind checks, and I'm not really sure why, but I check back, which is very strange. The river comes the 8 of hearts on top and a King of spades on bottom. I now have the nut flush on top. Big blind checks for a 3rd time. I decide to make up for lost value and bet out 40. My opponent thinks for a bit before flicking in the call, and it looks like I have the best of it on both boards, so I'm going to scoop this pot. Definitely played this one a bit weird, but I'll take it. Back to hold'em, there's a couple of limps before I look down at King 9 suited on the button. I raise to 12, and only the under the gun limper makes the call. My opponent decides to check dark as we go heads up to a flop of 5-7 ace 2 hearts. I pick up the second nut flush draw, good enough for a c-bet of 10. My opponent pretty quickly flashes 2 black kings before throwing them in the muck. I totally did not expect to see that hand after they limp called my raise and checked in the dark. Very happy that the board did not come king high, as I could have found myself in a world of pain. On to the next one. In this one, I pick up ace king in under the gun. I open the action to 10, and the small blind is the only player to make the call. We go heads up to a flop of 5-5-4. It looks to me like the small blind is checking. I want to make sure, so I ask,
check,
which counts as a check. What an idiot. The turn comes an offsuit 10. Small blind checks again. I'm just clicking buttons at this point, and I throw out a bet of $10, which the small blind calls. We go to the river, which comes the 3 of clubs, completing a whole bunch of draws. Small blind checks for a 3rd time, and I decide to make one last bat play and bet 25 with a hand that has a ton of showdown value and will only get called by better. Thankfully, I don't get punished as my opponent snap folds. I take this one down. Back on the drama streets, 5 of us see a flop of 7-7-4 2 spades, and I look down at queen 6-6-6-4, so I flop 2 pair with the 4 in my hand, but more importantly, I've got trips down. Action checks to the big blind, who leads for 20. I call, and the button makes the call as well. Heading into draw time, I throw away the queen and 4. Maybe I can improve to a full house or quads down and pick up some equity on the board. The turn comes another 7, and I pick up a 9 and an 8, so not much improvement. Big blind bets again, they pot it for 90, and this time I'm the only player to make the call. Heads up to the river, which comes to 9 of hearts. Big blind puts me all in for 134 effective. I announce call. Let's just hope I'm not getting coolered on the draw half of the pot, and I don't. My opponent's got the case 7 for quads on the board. My trips are good, and we chop. We rejoin the action later in the evening, and first interesting hand I pick up is pocket aces from under the gun. Let's go. I open to 10, and I get called by the cutoff and the small blind. We go 3 ways to a flop of ace, queen, king, rainbow. I flop top set. Small blind checks. The cutoff checks out of turn. With action on me, I see bet for 20. The cutoff makes the call. Interesting. And the small blind comes along. Still 3 ways to the turn, which comes to 7 of spades. Small blind checks again. I fire for 60, and this time the cutoff shoves for 147. Action is now on the small blind, and they shove as well for 157. You're thinking, wow, you've got top set and 2 players shove into you. Amazing. But is it really though? I mean, I'm probably not up against kings, queens, or ace king, as those hands would have most likely 3-bet me pre-flop. I think pocket 7s would most likely give up on the flop. So when 2 players shove into me, what am I beating here, really? King, queen, and that's about it. That being said, God didn't give up his only son for me to fold the second nuts, especially not for that price, so I make the call. The river is a brick, and the cutoff shows Jack 10 of diamonds for the flop straight. Small blind did have king, queen of spades. My aces get. I decided I'm not going to reload and play short stacked. A few hands later, there's a button straddle to 5. My opponent from the previous hand raises to 15 from the big blind. Action folds to me in the low jack, and I look down at 2 black kings. I'm sitting on just over 60 bucks, and while I could just go ahead and shove here, I do want to keep all of my opponent's weaker holdings in the hand, so I elect to flat call with the intention of getting in all in on the flop. The button straddler calls as well, so we go 3 ways to a flop of 10, deuce, 3, 2 spades. The big blind throws out a very small c-bet of 10. I go along with my plan and shove for 47 total. The button folds, and sadly, that's as much value as I'm going to get, as the big blind finds the fold as well. In this one, I pick up ace queen suited from under the gun, and I open to 10 bucks. I get called by the button and the small blind, so we go 3 ways to a flop of 10, queen, 10, rainbow. Small blind checks. I continue for 15. The button raises to 40, and the small blind folds. I don't expect my opponent to raise trip 10s on the flop, so it looks to me like they either have a weaker queen or a draw. I don't want them to fold, so I elect to just call, leaving me with 50 bucks behind. I will happily snap call if they put me all in. Heads up to the turn, which comes to 5 of spades. I check again. My opponent does put me all in, and I do snap call. You have a 10? No? Good shot. No? Nice to get a full double up on this one. Here, there's an open from middle position to 8. The hijack calls, and I look down at ace queen from the cutoff. I 3-bet to 25. Middle position folds, and the hijack calls. I've noticed that this player seems to be calling opens and 3-bets pretty wide, so I'm definitely looking to get into pots with them. We go heads up to a flop of 10, 7, ace, rainbow, and they decide to donk lead into me for 30. At this point, I'm putting them on a weaker ace, and I want to get it all in as soon as possible. I raise to 80, and they make the call. The turn comes to 10 of spades, which makes it harder for them to have the only weaker ace I was really worried about, ace 10. This time, they decide to check. I put my last 96 bucks in the middle. I fade the snap call, which is great news. My opponent goes in a tank for about 30 seconds before making the call. The river comes to 6 spades. My opponent tables ace queen of diamonds, and we chop. In this one, there's a limp from under the gun before the cutoff raises to 12. Folds to me in the big blind, and I look down at ace jack offsuit. I make the call, and the under the gun limper comes along as well. We go 3 ways to a pretty favorable flop of 7 jack 3 rainbow. Being first to act, I start things off with a check. Checks to the cutoff with c-bets for 20. I decide to just make the call with the intention of getting it all in on the turn. Under the gun gets out of the way. The turn comes a pretty safe looking 4 of hearts. I check to the cutoff, who fires again for 50. I check raise all in for 98, fully expecting a snap call for that price, but it does not come. The cutoff tanks for almost a minute and a half before making the fold, and I take down another nice pot, fighting my way back to starting stack. This one, we're playing Dramaha. I'm in under the gun with King 10-6-5, and the flop comes Queen 9 Jack 2 clubs. I flop the nuts on the board, and I've got a pair of kings down. Action checks to the big blind, who bets 25, and I debate between calling and raising. I flop the nut straight, which is great, but with my current cards, that's about the best hand I'll have by the river, while my opponents could be drawing to full houses or flushes, which I will lose to. Also, I know the big blind plays pretty straightforward, so when they bet pot, they either flop the same straight or a set. They won't be folding if I raise, and with a set or a club draw, they could be free rolling me. For that reason, I decide to just call, and the cutoff makes the call as well. We're headed 3 ways into draw time. I draw 2, holding on to my pair of kings and my straight. I draw a queen and a 7, and the turn comes the 8 of clubs. No improvement on my down hand, and I now lose to the flush. The big blind down bets to 30. I make a questionable call, partially because the under the gun player is new to Dramaha, and there's a chance they could be putting money into the pot with a worse hand, and they make the call as well. The big blind announces check in the dark as we head to the river, which comes the 3 of clubs. Action checks around, and the big blind shows King 10 for the flop straight that turned the second nut flush, and as I thought might be the case, my pair of kings down is good, so I'm going to chop this one with the big blind. In this hand, action folds to the button, who limps before I look down at pocket queens in the small blind, and I raise to 10. Button makes the call, so we go heads up to a flop of 3-4-3 2 spades. I see bet for 10 bucks, and the button makes the call. The turn comes the 6 of clubs. I continue for 20, and the button calls. The river is the jack of diamonds. I fire a third bet of 50, and the button folds, slowly chipping up. Let's keep it going. I end up cashing out for 230 bucks, making a nice comeback after getting my aces cracked, but still booking a loss of 70 bucks for the night. Let's fast forward a few days for a few more hands. I would have made a separate vlog for this session if it wasn't for the fact that I was card dead all night long. Let's take a look at the few interesting hands I did end up playing. In this one, we're playing Dramaha, and 6 of us see a flop of 5-5-4 rainbow, and I look down at Jack 8-7-6-5 from the cutoff. I flop trips on the board, and I've got a 4-liner turn straight in my hand. Under the gun leads for 15. Myself and the small blind make the call. 3 of us headed to draw time. I get rid of the jack. Let's see if I can draw a 4 or a 9 to make a straight. The turn comes a jack of hearts, and I draw a deuce, so no improvement for me on either hand. Small blind leads for 50, and under the gun calls. I decide to make the call because I know the under the gun player is new to Dramaha and could be calling a little wide, and I still have a chance to improve to a full house on the board. The river comes, the 4 of hearts. I unfortunately don't improve. The small blind now jams, and under the gun makes the call. Since I folded a jack, trip 5s is actually a decent hand on this board, but it's very likely that one of my opponents has the case 5 with a better kicker, so I end up making the fold. Small blind shows a 9 high straight in their hand, and trip 5s with a 9 kicker on the board. Under the gun cannot beat either, so they're going to scoop. Pretty funny because the small blind actually had the exact same hand, but they ended up being more fortunate with their draw. Happy to see I made the correct decision. Not happy to see a decent portion of my stack headed the small blind's way. In this one, there's a limp from under the gun 1. Action folds to the cutoff, who raises to 11 before I look down at 10-9 suited in the small blind. I'm itching to play a hand, so I make the call, and the under the gun 1 limper comes along as well. We go 3 ways to a flop of 10 deuce queen rainbow. Action checks to the cutoff, who see bets for 15. I decide to make the call, see how things develop, and under the gun 1 folds. Heads up to the turn, which comes the 10 of hearts. I debate between checking and betting. I don't think my opponent is very strong here, so I think my best move is to let them continue bluffing. I check, and unfortunately they check back. The turn comes to Jack of Clubs. I decide to try and make up for lost value, fire a bet of $35, which the cutoff actually calls. I show my trip 10s, and they're good. This brings us to the last hand of the vlog, which in game took place about an hour later. I've been folding for an hour straight until I look down at ace queen in the hijack and action folds to me. I open the action to 10 and I get called by the button, small blind, and big blind. We're going 4 ways to a flop of ace 5-3, 2 spades. I started a hand with just over $100, so I'm pretty much going to commit my stack on this one. I continue for 25, and the button is the only player to make the call. Player on the button is a guy called Andrew. He watches the channel, and he told me he's been trying to make the vlog for weeks now. Well, if he's going to double me up in the process, I'm more than happy to oblige. We go heads up to the turn, which comes a 4, putting a 4-liner to a straight, but I'm not really worried about Andrew holding a deuce. I'm looking to get value from a worse ace or a flush draw though, so I put my last 69 in the middle, and Andrew snap calls.
Just have an ace.
Deuce and a 4.
Oh, you flopped it.
I flopped it, yeah.
Very nice, man.
Is he on the vlog?
Yes, that will be on the vlog, yes.
Well, Andrew, you wanted to make the vlog, and you did it. Let's give Andrew a big round of applause, everyone.